And I'm going to diagram this, what just happened, navigating to the index of this application, all right? And to do that, we're going to have a look at our inspector, all right? So it will be a lot easier for the session if everyone uses Chrome or some kind of Chrome-based browser, and you can right-click and inspect the page, all right? Right-click, inspect. And it'll be easier to use this to do this on using Chrome, but any browser has some kind of developer tools that you can use to get visibility on the things that are happening. So if you really desire to use a non-Chrome browser, definitely have a quick Google to find out how you can access its dev tools. There's usually somewhere in the nav bar at the top that you can have a look at how to do it. If not, just let me know. We can figure it out together. Otherwise, just use Chrome. It'll be super easy. And we're going to have a look at this network tab over here. I'm going to have a look at what's happening. So what I want to do is diagram this process. And the way that I'm going to do is thinking about the different parts of or the different actors involved in this process. So I'm going to start off thinking about a user interacting with the browser. So for example, that first, let's imagine it like this. So the first thing that happened was I asked my browser to go to specifically typed into sort of that URL bar, so type into the nav bar in the browser, the URL, whatever it was, HTTP, let's grab it, etc., etc., etc. So this was the first interaction that happened. As a user, I typed into this into the browser. Type into, let's call it let's not call it the nav bar, let's call it the URL bar. Okay, and specifically the actual address here. That's what I did. I just typed that in and pressed enter. After that, the browser then did something. So the browser then makes a request when I hit enter. It's on this side that we're thinking back to the difference between the client side and the server side. So let's put this in color blue. So on this side, we're thinking about client side. On this side, we're thinking about server side. So the browser then makes a request. I'm going to have a look at what that request looks like. So I'm just going to refresh this page. And using the network tab, I can have a look at the things that just happened. So I just refreshed the page with the network tab open, and a couple things came up here. We're going to ignore this request that returned and not found, because the application doesn't have one. So just ignore this when it happens, or if you go have a look at why this is happening. But this is okay. We're going to have a look at this request here. So I'm going to click on it. This brings up some more information that we can have a look at. And I'm going to have a look, first of all, at the headers here. The response headers, we're not going to worry about for the moment until I model that in my diagram. I just want to have a look at the request first. So anything that says request URL, request method, or the request headers down here are things that we're going to have a look at. If you want to see how the text looks like when it gets sent, then you just click on sort of view source, all right? The difference between view source and view parsed. When you view parsed, this is just like your browser trying to show it a little bit more readable, like so, all right? But when you actually send the request, it'll look a little bit more like this. All right. So you can see that when I pass the request headers, the first line of the request is here. All right. So the first part is the HTTP method that happened. It's on my diagram. I want to add that in. So we make a GET request, and we make a request specifically to the index. And then this is the version of HTTP that we're using. HTTP 1.1. So this is at the moment the first line of my request. This has got the most important information at the moment because it gives me information that my server can handle. It'll say, okay, yes, I'm going to respond to a GET request at the index, and then execute something. The host is important because then we build up the URL. So this is the host. So this is the server from Heroku app. Heroku is a service provider that allows me to host applications. And then there's a bunch more key value pairs here that you can definitely have a look at. All right, but we're not going to worry so much about them for the moment. We don't need to worry about them. The main ones that we're going to have a look at are just this, the first couple of lines. You can see a little bit more sort of like useful information at the top here, which is why it shows you the full URL. So from the host and the index here, this path, and what kind of method it is. So if you want a quick look, that's why it's at the top here and gives you useful information about what just happened. So this is like a summary of both the request and the response. If you want a little bit more information about the individual ones, then you scroll down to these two things and you can have a look at the response that comes back. Okay, so let's go back to my model. I'm modeling that GET HTTP request. There's nothing else that's coming in the request. There's no request data. It's just a simple request. You can put here the host, because I think the host is important. And that is, as we mentioned, DFA Heroku app. Cows like cats. Cats.herokuapp.com. Okay, so this gives me enough information about this request for my application to then handle. So what is this actor here? Well, yesterday we talked a little bit about, we scroll up, it was here. What happens on the server side, and we started to introduce the difference between a views and a controller. And I mentioned that a controller is responsible for listening to the request and sending back the right response. So here would be where I model my controller. So I could add in an actor here, so this is the controller, this listens to the request and sends back a response. What does that response look like? Well, we can go back to my network tab to have a look at that response. I can click on the raw response data to have a look at exactly what was in the response body. So this is the text that came back in the response. So we get a response. These are the response headers, and then we also get a response body. All right, and the response body you can always see here in this tab. So the way that we're going to model this is back over here in the green arrow that goes the other way now. We come back this way. and we need to make sure that we have a few things here. The status code, and so the status is 200. And the important information here is that we have a request body that is all of the HTML. So you can add to your diagram however you want. I'm going to shorthand it to HTML. You can add more information here if you wanted to. And then the browser is going to show this back to the user. So what this does, we can model this with an arrow back to the user and sort of show here that it's going to render HTML on screen. Specifically, we see this here. So this is a quick example of trying to diagram the process that just happened. We make the user types into that URL bar a certain address. When we hit enter, the browser then makes that request in a certain format. We get that data by having a look at the network tab, looking at this first tab here. And there's a summary of information here, and we have a look, specifically look at the request by clicking on the view source. We can see that this is the first line that happens, so that our application can make sense of what to do next. Now we don't have access to the application, it's hidden away, you can't see what the code for it. But what happens is we have access to our network tab here, so we can have a look at the response. So after we send this request, what comes back? We get a response that has a status code and it's got a response body here. So that data then gets displayed by the browser. The browser will have a look at this, and this is what we see here. Cool. Now, I only put the word controller at the top here. If there were, if we had access to it, we could probably end up trying to think more about splitting this into responsibilities, like views and models maybe. But at the moment, we don't really know how things are organized. All right. So we can't really make that part of our model at the moment, just to say where some of this information lies. So we're just going to keep this at the moment under this name. You can call it app, you can call it controller, but this is the thing that is sending back the response, right? So the instructions for this session are to have a look at these different processes. All right, as I've just done a demonstration of how to model visiting that homepage, specifically visiting this link and seeing this HTML. So this is the first one. Go back and do this yourselves, and then there's a few more to have a look at. What happens if you make a typo? What happens if there's a missing page? And a few more to have a look at. And so you're going to pair up, and you're going to go through on this mirror board. If you zoom out, there's a few different spaces. Every pair just take a little whiteboard and go through the same process of trying to think about how does this process look like. All right, what happens, what is the request, and what is the response? And try and for each of the processes, make sure you understand what is that first line of the request? Is it, what kind of HTTP verb is it? What's the path? And in the response, what's the response status code, and what's in the response body? All right. Any questions before you all pair up, before I pair you all up?
So we're just looking in the browser. We're not doing any actual like coding, programming ourselves. just diagramming and inspecting.
I know it's unusual. No actual coding, no programming, no. It's simply trying to get better at using the tools at your disposal to get visibility over this process, making sure we're trying to form in your head a better visualization of that HTTP request response cycle, because we'll be doing a lot of it over the next few weeks. Good question. Any questions that come up during the course of this, you might discover interesting things, just put them on the right-hand side here in this questions part here. All right, it's in a big area here. I'm going to whack some questions down. We'll go through a Q&A at the end. Why is my clock? What is going on over here? Am I still showing my screen? Look at the top right, my clock. It's gone a bit weird.
I see that. I agree.
It's a bit weird, isn't it?
It's like not sure whether they're 1s or 7s or something.
Dear me. All right. I'm going to pair everyone up.